Blood dripped from Lieutenant Commander Morgan Blackwood's split lip onto her dusty shirt, each crimson droplet marking time in the sweltering concrete room. 5 armed men surrounded her, but it was the 6th who commanded her attention, Commander Malcolm Drake. His weathered face, all hard angles and cold calculation, loomed before her as he rubbed the knuckles that had just connected with her jaw. The chair beneath her was bolted to the floor, her hands secured behind her back with zip ties cutting into her wrists. The temperature hovered around 95 degrees sweat and blood mingling as it traced paths down her neck. Morgan's mind, trained through years of the most punishing military program on Earth, automatically cataloged every detail of her surroundings. Concrete room approximately 12 by 15 feet. 1 steel-reinforced door currently closed. 2 windows high and barred. 5 hostiles with AK-47s held with practiced familiarity. The taste of copper in her mouth. The smell of gun oil, sweat, and something else, fear, though not her own. "The American woman is not so strong now," Drake said, switching from Arabic to English for her benefit. "Where is your arrogance? Where is your Western superiority?" Morgan said nothing, maintaining her cover as she had for the past 3 months. Her average height and athletic build were carefully hidden under loose clothing that made her look softer than she was. Brown hair pulled back in a ponytail, now disheveled. Hazel eyes that tracked every movement with precision that would have alarmed her captors if they had been paying attention. But they weren't paying attention. They were celebrating. Drake stood over her, a man in his 40s with the barrel chest of someone who'd built his authority on intimidation and violence. "You will tell us everything. Who sent you? What is your mission? Who are your contacts?" As blood pooled in her mouth, Morgan made a calculation that would haunt Drake for the approximately 7 minutes he had left to live. Some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed. And when you hit a Navy SEAL, even one with her hands bound behind her back, even one outnumbered 5-1, even one who's supposed to be maintaining a cover identity, you've just made the last mistake of your life. Before we show you what happened in that room, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and hit subscribe. Because what came next was 7 minutes of violence, so precise, so calculated, and so absolutely devastating that it would become a classified case study in what happens when training capability and pure controlled rage converge in a person who knows exactly how dangerous they are. 3 months earlier, Morgan Blackwood sat in a secure briefing room at Naval Special Warfare Command in Virginia. The walls were an institutional gray, adorned only with the insignias of various special operations units, and a large map of the world where certain regions were marked with small, inconspicuous pins. 6 people occupied the room, all focused on the woman at the head of the table. Commander Patricia Walsh, Morgan's direct superior, stood beside a projection screen displaying satellite imagery of a compound in the Arizona desert. Intelligence suggests that Desert Scorpion has established a significant presence along the Arizona border. What began as a weapons trafficking operation has evolved into something potentially much more dangerous. Rear Admiral James Harrington, a towering figure even at 68, leaned forward in his chair. His face, weathered by decades of service, betrayed nothing but his ice-blue eyes burned with intensity. The ribbon rack on his chest told the story of a career spanning from Cold War operations to the Gulf War and beyond. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwood." Harrington's voice carried the gravitas of a man who had made life-or-death decisions for longer than Morgan had been alive. "I've reviewed your service record. 8 years in Naval Special Warfare. Top of your Buds class, the first female to complete the program, I might add. Combat deployments to 11 different countries. Your expertise in intelligence gathering under deep cover is precisely what this mission requires." Morgan nodded, maintaining the professional demeanor that had become second nature. "Thank you, sir." Walsh clicked to the next slide, revealing the face of a man in his 40s with cold, calculating eyes. "This is Commander Malcolm Drake, former military contractor who went off the grid 6 years ago. He now runs Desert Scorpion's Arizona operation. Your mission is to gather intelligence on their activities, particularly regarding a new type of weapon they're developing." "What kind of weapon are we talking about, Commander?" Morgan asked. Harrington exchanged glances with Walsh before answering. "Initially, we believed it was conventional high-grade explosives, possibly shoulder-fired missiles. Recent intelligence suggests it might be chemical in nature." The Admiral's jaw tightened. "I've seen what chemical weapons can do firsthand during the Gulf War in '91. entire units incapacitated within minutes. If Desert Scorpion has developed an advanced nerve agent and plans to deploy it on American soil, he let the implication hang heavy in the air. Your cover identity, Walsh continued, sliding a file across the table. Catherine Wilson, humanitarian aid worker with Global Relief Aid. You'll be distributing medical supplies and food to communities near the border. Morgan opened the file, studying the documentation and photographs of a young woman with kind eyes and an earnest smile. The real Catherine Wilson, killed 3 months ago. Harrington said, his voice suddenly heavy with regret. Her vehicle hit an IED planted by Desert Scorpion operatives testing explosive compounds. Her body was never recovered, which gives us our window. Morgan absorbed this information, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She would become this woman, carry her identity, and perhaps bring justice to those responsible for her death. We have 72 hours to prepare you, Walsh said. After that, you'll be on the ground in Arizona with minimal support. This is deep cover, Morgan. You maintain your identity at all costs. Observe document report. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Morgan nodded, already mentally preparing for the transformation. What about extraction? Standard protocols. We'll have a direct line through your only contact on the ground. Walsh clicked toward an image of a man in his late 30s with cropped hair and the bearing of a career soldier. Sergeant Michael Davis. He'll pose as your driver and assistant. He's the only person who'll know your true identity. As the briefing continued with tactical details, satellite imagery, and intelligence assessments, Morgan noticed Harrington watching her with an intensity that it went beyond professional interest. When the others filed out for a scheduled break, the Admiral remained behind. Lieutenant Commander, he said quietly, there's something about this mission you should know that isn't in the briefing packets. Morgan waited, sensing the gravity in his tone. This isn't just about weapons trafficking. We believe Desert Scorpion has connections to an organization called the Pantheon, a network of former intelligence operatives from the Cold War era who never accepted that the conflict ended. Harrington moved to the window, looking out at the Virginia coastline as if searching for something on the horizon. I spent the better part of 3 decades tracking these people. Moscow, Berlin, Prague, wherever the shadows were deepest. Most of the world thinks the Cold War ended with the fall of the Soviet Union, but some battles never really end. They just change form. He turned back to face her. I recommended you specifically for this mission, Blackwood. Not just because of your skills, though they're exceptional. There's something else you have that we need, something that can't be taught in any training program. What's that, sir? The ability to appear harmless until the exact moment you aren't. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I saw it during your Hell Week. Everyone else was visibly suffering, visibly fighting. You were calm, almost serene, even as you outperformed men twice your size. Morgan remembered those 136 hours of constant physical activity, frigid water, and less than 4 hours of sleep total. While others shrouded to push through the pain, she had retreated inward, finding a place of quiet determination that carried her forward when her body screamed to stop. That's what you'll need for this mission, Harrington continued. The ability to be underestimated, to be dismissed, to be invisible until the moment you choose not to be. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Drake isn't just dangerous because he's violent. He's dangerous because he's smart, and he has resources and connections that shouldn't be possible for a simple weapons trafficker. You think there's something bigger behind Desert Scorpion? Morgan stated, not a question. I know there is, and finding proof of those connections is just as important as uncovering their weapons program. Harrington's eyes held hers. Sometimes I wonder if we truly won the Cold War, Lieutenant Commander, or if it was just one round ending before the next began. 2 weeks later, Morgan Blackwood, now fully immersed in her role as Catherine Kate Wilson, arrived at a small airstrip outside Phoenix, Arizona. The desert heat hit her like a physical force as she descended from the small charter plane, carrying a worn duffel bag that contained the sparse belongings of an aid worker dedicated to her cause. A rugged Jeep was parked nearby, and beside it stood Sergeant Michael Davis. His military bearing was carefully concealed beneath casual clothes, but Morgan recognized it immediately, the way he scanned the surroundings, the controlled economy of his movements. Ms. Wilson, he called, approaching with a practiced smile. I'm Mike Davis, your local coordinator. Welcome to Arizona. Up close, Morgan noted the faint scar that ran along his jawline and the hardness in his eyes that spoke of combat experience. According to his file, Davis had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, the last ending when an IED attack in Kandahar left him with shrapnel wounds and a medical discharge. He'd been recruited specifically for this operation because of his experience and his personal connection to the mission. Once they were in the Jeep and away from potential observers, Davis's demeanor shifted subtly. Compound is about 40 minutes from here. We'll be operating out of there, making supply runs to communities within a 50-mile radius of the border. He glanced at her. How was your flight, Lieutenant Commander? Uneventful. And it's Kate for the duration, Sergeant. He nodded, eyes returning to the road. Of course, sorry, force of habit. After a moment of silence, he added, I knew her, you know, the real Kate. Morgan turned to study him more carefully. This hadn't been in the briefing. How? We met in Kabul 2018. I was providing security for a medical outreach program. She was coordinating supply distribution. His knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. We were together for 8 months before my tour ended. Tried to make it work long distance, but understanding dawned on Morgan. That's why you requested this assignment. Davis's jaw tightened. They told me it was an accident at first. Vehicle malfunction in rough terrain. I knew better. Kate was meticulous about maintenance. When I pressed for details, suddenly the story changed classified incident, need-to-know basis. His voice hardened. Then I got approached about this operation. This complicated things. Davis wasn't just a contact. He had an emotional stake in the mission. That could make him either more committed or more unpredictable. I'm sorry about Kate, Morgan said carefully. But you understand that for this to work, I need to become her completely. Any personal connection you had won't be a problem, he interrupted. I'm a professional, and taking down the people responsible for her death is all that matters now. The landscape outside transformed as they drove urban sprawl, giving way to increasingly barren terrain. Mountains rose in the distance, their rugged silhouettes stark against the blue sky. Occasionally they passed small communities, clusters of modest homes where children played in dusty yards and suspicious eyes tracked their vehicle. Desert Scorpion operates through a network of legitimate businesses, Davis explained as they drove. Transportation companies, private security firms, import-export operations. They've embedded themselves in these border communities, offering protection and employment where government presence is minimal. He pointed to a compound coming into view ahead, a cluster of white buildings surrounded by a high fence. That's our base of operations. Global Relief Aid has been working in this region for 3 years. The previous coordinator was reassigned last month, which created our opening. Morgan took in the details, already forming contingency plans and escape routes. What's our communication protocol? Davis tapped the dashboard where a small, innocuous-looking GPS unit was mounted. Modified low-frequency transmitter built into this. Looks like standard equipment functions like 1-2, but it can send encrypted data packets when activated properly. Weekly scheduled check-ins, emergency protocols if needed. As they pulled into the compound, Morgan noticed a group of local workers unloading boxes from a truck. Remember, she said quietly, from this moment on, I am Kate Wilson, aid worker humanitarian committed to helping others. Nothing more. Davis nodded, putting the Jeep in park. Welcome to the border, Ms. Wilson. I hope you are ready for the challenges ahead. Morgan smiled with Kate Wilson's idealistic determination. I've always believed that one person can make a difference, Mr. Davis. I'm here to prove it. Over the next several weeks, Morgan Blackwood disappeared entirely beneath the persona of Kate Wilson. She worked tirelessly distributing medical supplies, organizing community health initiatives, and building relationships with local residents. Every interaction, every conversation was an opportunity to gather information, to listen for whispers about Desert Scorpion's activities. She learned to map the network of connections, which trucking companies were fronts for weapons movement, which security consultants were actually enforcers, which local officials had been bought or intimidated into cooperation. She documented everything in coded journal entries that looked like innocent reflections on her humanitarian work. The community of San Miguel became her primary focus, a small settlement just 15 miles from the border where several Desert Scorpion associates lived. Among them was the Martinez family, whose patriarch Carlos worked as a driver for one of the organization's transportation companies. My husband is a good man, Elena Martinez told Kate one afternoon as they organized a children's vaccination program. He takes the jobs that pay because we have 3 children to feed. But lately he comes home different, worried, he doesn't sleep. Morgan recognized an opportunity. Is there anything I can do to help? Elena hesitated, then spoke in a hushed tone. He says the new routes are dangerous, not because of the border patrol or the terrain, but because of what they carry. Last week, one of the other drivers got sick after a container leaked. His skin, it burned. Carlos says they weren't told proper safety procedures. Chemical weapons. Morgan's pulse quickened, though she kept her expression concerned and sympathetic. That sounds serious. Has he seen a doctor? The company sent their own medical team. They took him away. No one has seen him since. Elena's eyes darted nervously. Please, you cannot tell anyone I told you this. Of course not, Morgan assured her, making a mental note to include this information in her next transmission. I'm just concerned for Carlos's safety. That evening, as Morgan recorded her observations in her journal, Davis entered the small office she used at the compound. We have visitors tomorrow, he said quietly, closing the door. Drake himself is coming to inspect the outreach programs in the area. Apparently, he's curious about the new aid worker who's been so active in San Miguel. Morgan felt a spike of adrenaline. He suspects something. Hard to say, could be routine, could be your activities have caught his attention. Davis lowered his voice further. Whatever his reason, this is our first direct contact with the primary target. We need to make it count. Morgan nodded, already calculating how to use this opportunity. Any specific intelligence we should try to gather? Location of their main compound for one. We have satellite imagery of several potential sites, but nothing confirmed. Also, any information on shipment schedules. Davis handed her a small, innocuous-looking USB drive disguised as a house key. Updated recognition software. If you can get clear images of any associates he brings with him, we might be able to identify connections to other organizations. The next day, Drake arrived with a 4-vehicle convoy, black SUVs with tinted windows and armed guards, who positioned themselves strategically around the compound. Morgan, fully embodying Kate Wilson's nervous but determined demeanor, greeted him with professional courtesy. Drake was taller than his photographs suggested, his presence commanding immediate attention. He moved with the confidence of a predator, eyes constantly assessing, calculating. 2 men flanked him, one a massive individual with a shaved head and dead eyes. The other leaner with the watchful precision of someone with specialized training. Ms. Wilson, Drake extended his hand. I've heard impressive things about your work here. Morgan shook his hand with Kate's idealistic enthusiasm. Drake, your support has been invaluable to our efforts. Would you like a tour of our facility? And as she guided him through the compound, showing him the medical supplies, the educational materials, the logistical operations, Morgan maintained a careful balance, competent enough to be credible, but with the slightly naive idealism of someone who saw the world in simpler terms than it actually existed. You've accomplished a great deal in a short time, Drake commented as they finished the tour. Your predecessor was not nearly so effective. There was something in the way he emphasized the last word that sent a warning signal through Morgan's mind. I believe in our mission, she replied with Kate's earnestness. These communities need support, especially the children. Drake studied her face with unsettling intensity. Tell me, Ms. Wilson, what brought you to this particular region? There are humanitarian crises all over the world. Morgan was prepared for this question. I was in Kabul for 3 years before this assignment. After the drawdown of Western forces, many aid organizations redirected their efforts. Global Relief Aid believed my experience would translate well to the challenges here. Kabul, Drake repeated. Which district? Primarily Wazir Akbar Khan, though we had outreach programs in Karte Parwan and occasionally in Shahri Na. Morgan answered without hesitation, drawing on the extensive briefing materials she'd memorized about Kate's actual work history. Something flickered across Drake's face, recognition, perhaps, or suspicion. But it passed quickly, replaced by a polite smile that never reached his eyes. Your dedication is commendable, Miss Wilson. He glanced at his watch. Unfortunately, I have other matters requiring my attention today. As he turned to leave, Morgan noticed his bodyguard, the leaner one, watching her with a different kind of attention. His stance, the way he held his shoulders, the precise distance he maintained from Drake, these weren't the habits of a standard security contractor. This man had specialized training. Military almost certainly, but with an edge of something else. Something that reminded her of Cold War-era operatives she'd studied in intelligence briefings. She caught a few words of Russian as he murmured something to Drake. Former Spetsnaz. Here on American soil, this wasn't a coincidence. This was evidence of exactly what Harrington had warned her about: connections to something bigger than a regional weapons trafficking operation. After Drake's departure, Morgan met Davis in their secure communication room, a small storage area where the signal-blocking panels had been disguised as insulation. "Did you get images?" Davis asked immediately. Morgan nodded, handing him the concealed camera. Drake and both bodyguards clear facial shots. But there's something else. The second bodyguard, the one who stayed closest to Drake, spoke Russian, and his tactical positioning showed Spetsnaz training. Davis's expression darkened. Russian Special Forces operators don't just show up working security for border arms dealers. This confirms the Admiral's suspicions about outside connections. "We need to accelerate our intelligence gathering," Morgan decided. Drake's visit wasn't routine inspection, he was assessing me personally. "You think your cover's blown?" "No, but he's suspicious by nature. He'll be watching more closely now." Morgan pulled out a map of the region. "We need to locate their main compound and manufacturing facility. Elena Martinez mentioned her husband transporting hazardous materials that cause chemical burns. If they're producing nerve agents," Davis nodded grimly, "I'll follow the next transportation convoy that leaves from the Western Depot. Meanwhile, you should continue building trust with the Martinez family. If Carlos is directly involved in moving these materials, he might know where they're coming from," Morgan finished. "I'll arrange another community health clinic in San Miguel tomorrow." 2 days later, Morgan was examining a child with respiratory issues in San Miguel when Elena Martinez approached her urgently. "Kate, can I speak with you?" Her voice was tight with fear. "Privately." Morgan finished the examination, prescribed medication, and followed Elena to a quiet corner of the community center. "Carlos didn't come home last night," Elena whispered. "He called once, told me to take the children and stay with my sister in Phoenix for a few days. He sounded afraid." Morgan kept her expression concerned but calm. "Did he say why?" "Something about a new delivery, bigger than before. He said they were moving everything to the main site near the canyon." Elena grabbed Morgan's hand. "He's never mentioned any details about his work before. I'm afraid something terrible is happening." Grand Canyon. The pieces clicked into place. Satellite imagery had shown unusual activity at an abandoned ranch near the canyon's edge, but there hadn't been enough evidence to confirm it as Desert Scorpion's main base of operations. "When is this happening, Elena? When is the delivery?" "Tomorrow night," that's all he said. Tears welled in Elena's eyes. "Please, if you know someone who can help him." "I'll do everything I can," Morgan promised, already planning her next move. That night, she slipped away from the compound, using the cover of a routine supply check. Davis had already positioned himself to monitor the Western Transportation Depot, so Morgan would have to investigate the canyon site alone. The abandoned ranch sat 12 miles from the Grand Canyon's south rim, its crumbling buildings providing perfect cover for illicit operations. Using advanced thermal imaging equipment disguised as standard binoculars, Morgan observed the property from a ridge half a mile away. The main house showed normal heat signatures, but the large barn behind it was different. Despite the desert heat, the structure registered significantly cooler temperatures, evidence of heavy insulation and climate control. Underground facilities were a hallmark of chemical weapons production, which required controlled environments and specialized ventilation. Morgan shifted position to get a better angle on the vehicle entrance, where armed guards patrolled in patterns that betrayed professional military training. As she adjusted her observation point, her foot dislodged a small rock that clattered down the slope. A guard's head snapped in her direction. Morgan froze, becoming one with the landscape as she'd been trained. For long seconds, she remained perfectly still as the guard scanned the ridgeline, rifle at the ready. Finally, he turned away, but the patrol pattern changed. They were now more alert, more thorough in their sweeps. It was time to withdraw. Morgan had confirmed the location and gathered critical intelligence on the security measures. She began a careful retreat, moving silently through the scrub brush toward her concealed vehicle. She was nearly clear when the desert night erupted with the sound of approaching vehicles. Headlights cut through the darkness as three SUVs roared toward the compound from the main road. Morgan dropped to the ground using the terrain for cover. Through her night vision equipment, she watched as the vehicles stopped at the checkpoint. The center SUV's door opened, and Malcolm Drake emerged, gesturing emphatically to the compound's main building. This was unexpected. Drake's presence confirmed the importance of this facility, but it also increased the danger exponentially. Morgan needed to report this development immediately, but first she had to get clear of the area. She had just reached her vehicle when a voice called out behind her. "Stop right there!" Morgan turned slowly to see a guard approaching with his rifle raised. In the moonlight, she could make out his features, young, perhaps mid-20s, with the hardened look of someone who'd seen combat. "I'm so sorry," she said in Kate Wilson's voice, projecting embarrassment and confusion. "I got lost looking for the canyon viewpoint. My GPS must have led me wrong." The guard didn't lower his weapon. "This is private property. Let me see some ID." Morgan reached into her pocket as if for identification, calculating angles and distances. The guard was just close enough. Her hand came up empty. "I must have left it in my car. It's just over there, I can show you." "Don't move," he snapped, reaching for his radio with his left hand. Morgan had a split second to decide. If he called and this in her cover would be compromised. The mission would fail. Thousands of lives would be at risk. She moved. 8 years of the most intensive combat training on Earth transformed her from a seemingly harmless aid worker into a precision weapon. One moment she stood there apparently helpless. The next she had closed the distance and struck the guard's wrist, deflecting the rifle barrel as he fired. The shot went wide, kicking up dust from the desert floor. In the same fluid motion, she drove her knee into his solar plexus and twisted the rifle from his grip. He recovered faster than she expected, drawing a sidearm. Morgan swept his legs, bringing him down hard, then delivered a precise strike to his temple that rendered him unconscious. The entire exchange had taken less than 5 seconds, but the shot would have been heard. Already lights were coming on at the compound, and she could hear voices shouting commands. Morgan quickly secured the guard's weapons, then sprinted to her vehicle. The engine roared to life just as flashlight beams cut through the darkness behind her. She accelerated down the dirt road lights off, navigating by moonlight, until she reached the main highway. As she sped back toward the Global Relief Aid compound, she activated the emergency communication protocol on the specialized transmitter, sending a coded message to Davis. Primary target confirmed at Canyon site. Cover potentially compromised. Proceed with contingency alpha. The quiet ping of acknowledgement came just as she spotted headlights in her rearview mirror, multiple vehicles moving at high speed. They were coming for her. Morgan pushed the vehicle harder, taking a side road that would lead through a network of canyons where pursuit would be more difficult. The lights behind her split up. They were trying to cut off her escape routes. She had just navigated a particularly treacherous curve when a black SUV roared into view ahead, blocking the narrow road. Morgan slammed on the brakes, calculating options in the split second before impact. No good choices remained. She cranked the wheel hard, sending her vehicle off the road and down a shallow embankment. The airbag deployed as she crashed into the scrub brush, momentarily stunning her. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead as she forced the door open and stumbled out. Armed figures were already descending the embankment, flashlights and weapons trained on her position. Morgan reached for the concealed pistol at her ankle, but before she could draw it, a spotlight blinded her from above. "Catherine Wilson," Drake's voice carried clearly through the night air. "Or should I say Lieutenant Commander Morgan Blackwood, I believe we have much to discuss." The last thing Morgan saw was the butt of a rifle swinging toward her head. Then darkness claimed her. She awakened to find herself zip-tied to a chair in a concrete room surrounded by 5 armed men with Malcolm Drake standing before her. The mission had failed. But as Drake's hand connected with her face in that first devastating blow, splitting her lip and drawing blood, something changed. Rules of engagement shifted. Parameters altered. Some lines once crossed cannot be uncrossed. And when you hit a Navy SEAL, you've just made the last mistake of your life. Blood dripped from Morgan Blackwood's split lip, each crimson droplet marking the transition from covert operative to something else entirely. She tasted copper and determination as she assessed the concrete room that held her. 12 by 15 feet. One door reinforced steel, 2 windows high and barred. The air thick with dust and menace. 5 armed men positioned strategically around the space, and at their center, Commander Malcolm Drake. Drake circled her like a predator, satisfaction evident in the curl of his lip. "The American woman is not so strong now," he said, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of a man accustomed to power. "Where is your arrogance? Where is your Western superiority?" Morgan remained silent, blood pooling at the corner of her mouth. Her hands secured behind her with zip ties that bit into her wrists. The chair beneath her bolted to the floor. They'd learned that lesson from previous interrogations. But they hadn't learned what happens when you restrain a Navy SEAL. They hadn't learned that zip ties, while effective against civilians, were practically meaningless to someone trained to escape from them in under 30 seconds. But Morgan wasn't in a hurry, not yet. "I am humanitarian worker," she said in deliberately broken English, maintaining her cover even now. "I give medicine to children. Why you do this?" Drake laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor, and struck her again. This time a closed fist to the side of her head. Stars exploded across her vision. She let her head roll with the impact proper technique to minimize damage, and when it came back up, blood now ran from her nose as well. "You are spy," Drake said confidently. "American spy. You think we are stupid? You think we don't see you asking questions, taking pictures?" One of his men stepped closer, young, maybe mid-20s, with a scar across his left cheek that pulled his mouth into a permanent half-sneer. The others called him Scar. His AK-47 pointed casually at Morgan's chest. "Maybe we have some fun with the spy before we kill her," Scar suggested in Arabic, apparently thinking she didn't understand. Morgan understood perfectly. She spoke Arabic, Pashto, Dari, and passable Urdu, one of the reasons she'd been selected for this mission. It was also one of the many reasons these men were already dead. They just didn't know it yet. Drake considered the suggestion, then shook his head. "Later. First we get information. Then we send video to Americans showing what happens to their spies." He grabbed Morgan's hair, yanking her head back painfully. "You will tell us everything. Who sent you? What is your mission? Who are your contacts?" Morgan met his gaze steadily, measuring the overconfidence in his eyes. He thought he'd won, thought the tied hands and guns and numerical advantage made this a foregone conclusion. He was wrong. "I tell you truth," Morgan said, maintaining her broken English. "I am aid worker. Please, you make mistake." Drake struck her a third time. This one caught her cheekbone and would definitely leave a bruise. "No more lies," he roared. "You will talk or you will suffer before you die." Morgan took a slow breath through her nose, tasting blood, and made her decision. She'd maintained cover for 3 months. She'd gathered the intelligence she'd been sent to collect. She'd followed orders, stayed disciplined, been the perfect covert operative. But there were limits, lines that once crossed changed everything. Rashid had just crossed one. "Okay," Morgan said, and this time her English was perfect. Her accent gained, her voice steady and cold as winter. "I'll talk." The change in her voice made Drake pause. Something in his eyes shifted, the first flicker of doubt. "My name is Lieutenant Commander Morgan Blackwood, United States Navy," she said clearly. "Serial number 5847392. And you just made the last mistake of your life." The room went very quiet. Then Drake laughed, though it sounded forced. "Big words from woman tied to chair." Morgan moved. The zip tie breaking technique she'd been taught involves specific body positioning and explosive force, bringing your bound hands up over your head while simultaneously bringing your elbows down hard and fast. The plastic would snap at the locking mechanism if you did it right. She did it right. The zip tie broke with a sharp crack. Her hands came around in the same motion, and before anyone could process what had happened, she'd grabbed the chair she'd been sitting in, which wasn't actually bolted down. She'd been testing that and swung it in a horizontal arc that caught Drake in the side of the head with the force of someone who could bench press her own body weight 20 times. Drake went down hard, blood spraying from a split scalp. The 4 guards were already bringing their weapons up, but Morgan was already moving through their reaction time. She'd spent years training muscle memory to function faster than conscious thought, and those years paid dividends now. She threw the chair at Scar. He brought his AK-47 up to block, which meant he wasn't shooting, which gave her the half second she needed to close the distance. Close quarters combat against multiple armed opponents was about 3 things: speed, violence of action, and using their weapons against them. The moment you stopped moving, you died. The moment you hesitated, you died. The only way to survive was to be more aggressive than they could process. Morgan became a blur of controlled violence. She reached Scar as he was trying to get his rifle back on target. Her hand shot out, grabbed the barrel, and pushed it aside just as he fired. The burst of automatic fire went wide, hitting the wall instead of her. In the same motion, she drove her knee into his groin, stepped behind him as he doubled over, and used his body as a shield while yanking the AK-47 from his hands. Guard 2, a burly man Morgan mentally designated as Goliath, was firing now. The rounds hit Scar's body. Morgan felt the impact through the human shield she was holding, used it to pivot, and brought the captured AK-47 up in a smooth arc that caught Goliath across the face with the stock. He went down. Morgan dropped Scar's body and transitioned to the rifle, properly bringing it to her shoulder, just as Guard 3 glasses for the thin wire frames he wore got his weapon lined up. They fired simultaneously. His burst went high, panic shooting, which meant he aimed where she had been, not where she was. Morgan's burst was 3 rounds center mass, textbook perfect. Glasses dropped like someone had cut his strings. 2 down, 3 still in play. Guard 4, Knife, who carried a wicked-looking blade on his hip in addition to his rifle, was smarter. He had stepped back to get distance and was bringing his weapon up in a proper stance. Morgan ducked behind an overturned table just as he opened fire. Rounds punched through the wood, but by then she was rolling right, coming up in a crouch and putting 2 rounds into his exposed flank. 3 down, 2 left. Drake was getting to his feet, blood streaming down his face, reaching for the pistol on his hip. Guard 5, the oldest of the group, maybe 50, with the steady hands of someone who'd been in a lot of fights, had moved to flank her position. Morgan's combat computer was running full speed now, processing angles and threats and probabilities faster than conscious thought. Drake was closer, but moving slow, concussed from the chair. Guard 5 was the immediate threat. She fired at Guard 5, but her rifle clicked empty. The magazine she'd taken from Scar had been nearly spent. No time to reload. She threw the rifle at Guard 5, not to hurt him, but to make him flinch to buy the second she needed, and rushed Drake. He got his pistol clear of the holster. She was already inside his firing arc, her left hand slamming into his wrist, directing the pistol away, while her right hand drove a palm strike into his already damaged nose. Bone crunched. Drake screamed. Morgan grabbed the pistol, a Makarov she noted distantly, and twisted it out of his grip using a technique that definitely broke at least 2 of his fingers. She spun, bringing the Makarov up just as Guard 5 opened fire. The world went into slow motion the way it always did in gunfights. She saw the muzzle flash, felt the supersonic crack as rounds passed close enough to her head that they disturbed her hair. She squeezed the Makarov's trigger twice, double-tapped center mass, and Guard 5 folded. 4 down, 1 left. Drake was on his knees, holding his broken nose, blood pouring between his fingers. His eyes were wide with shock and fear, and the dawning realization that he'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. Morgan walked toward him, the Makarov held in a proper 2-handed grip, pointed at his center mass. "Please," Drake gasped in English. "Please, You hit me," Morgan said, her voice perfectly calm despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. "3 times. You tied my hands. You surrounded me with armed men. You thought that made you powerful." She stopped 2 feet from him, close enough that she couldn't miss, far enough that he couldn't reach her even if he tried. "Let me explain something to you," she continued. "I am a Navy SEAL. Do you know what that means? It means I spent 6 months in training where they tried to break me and failed. It means I've conducted operations in places you've never heard of against people who made you look like an amateur. It means while I've been trained to do one thing better than almost anyone else on this planet." She paused, letting him see his death in her eyes. "It means I'm very, very good at killing people." "Please," Drake whispered again. "I have family." "So did the aid worker you killed last month," Morgan said coldly. "The real one. The one whose identity I've been using. The one you murdered because she was actually trying to help people." Drake's eyes widened. He hadn't known she knew about that. "I know everything," Morgan said. "That's why I'm here. That's what I've been gathering for 3 months. Names, locations, supply routes, contacts. Everything." She raised the pistol, slightly lined up the shot. "Wait," Drake said desperately. "I can give you information. More than you have. I can..." I already have everything I need, Morgan interrupted. And honestly, you hit me 3 times while my hands were tied. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Nobody does that to a SEAL and walks away. The Makarov fired once. Drake collapsed backward, a neat hole in his forehead. Morgan stood there for a moment, breathing steadily, running through her post-combat checklist. Check for additional threats. None. Check for wounds, miraculously none that mattered. Check ammunition, 2 rounds left in the Makarov. The entire fight had lasted approximately 3 minutes and 40 seconds from the moment she'd broken the zip tie to the moment Drake had stopped breathing. 5 armed men fully equipped who thought they had every advantage. One SEAL with her hands literally tied behind her back at the start. It hadn't been close. Morgan searched the bodies quickly and professionally, taking additional ammunition, a better weapon. One of the guards had a well-maintained AK-47 with a full magazine and critically a cell phone from Drake's pocket. She tried the steel door locked from the outside as expected, but the lock was standard commercial grade, which meant it would yield to someone who knew what they were doing. And Morgan definitely knew what she was doing. She used a technique involving a thin piece of metal from one of the guards' equipment and about 90 seconds of patient manipulation. The lock clicked open. The hallway beyond was empty. She moved through it like a ghost weapon, up-checking corners using proper clearing techniques. Somewhere in this building were probably more guards, more militants, more problems to solve. But that was fine. Solving problems was what she did. She found a stairwell, ascended to the second floor, and located what she'd been looking for, an office, probably Drake's, with a computer, and more importantly, a satellite phone. She used the satellite phone to dial a number she'd memorized years ago. It rang twice. Thunder, a voice said. Lightning, Morgan replied, giving the authentication code. This is Knight Andale. I need immediate extraction from compromised position. 5 enemy killed in action. My cover is blown, but intelligence gathering is complete. There was a pause on the other end. Then Knight Andale, we have your location. Extraction team is 30 minutes out. Can you hold, Morgan looked around the office, mentally calculating fields of fire and defensive positions. Affirmative, she said, but tell them to hurry. This place is going to get crowded soon. She was right. 15 minutes later, she heard shouts from below. Someone had found the bodies in the interrogation room. Alarm was spreading through the compound. Morgan had used those 15 minutes well. She'd barricaded the office door, positioned furniture to create cover, and taken inventory of available ammunition. She had approximately 200 rounds for the AK-47 and a defensive position that would be difficult to assault directly. The first attack came 10 minutes after that. 6 militants tried to rush the office door. Morgan let them get close, then fired controlled bursts through the door at waist height. The assault broke apart in screaming and returned fire that didn't come close to her position. The second attack was smarter. They tried to flank through adjacent rooms. Morgan heard them moving, tracked them by sound, and fired through the walls. Concrete couldn't stop AK-47 rounds at close range. Neither could flesh. The third attack never came because that's when she heard the beautiful sound of helicopter rotors. Knight Andale, this is Reaper 6, a voice crackled over the satellite phone. We are inbound to your position. Pop smoke and prepare for emergency extraction. Morgan grabbed a smoke grenade she'd taken from one of the guards, threw it out the window, and watched orange smoke billow into the desert air. 30 seconds later, 2 MH-60 Blackhawks roared over the compound door gunners, laying down suppressive fire that sent militants scrambling for cover. One bird landed in the compound courtyard, while the other circled, providing overwatch. Morgan didn't wait for an invitation. She went out the window. Second floor wasn't too high for someone with her training. Hit the ground rolling, came up running, and sprinted toward the helicopter, while rounds kicked up dust around her feet. She made it to the bird, was hauled aboard by 2 operators in full tactical gear, and the Black Hawk was lifting off before she'd even sat down. Welcome aboard, ma'am, one of the operators said with a grin. Heard you had a rough day. Morgan touched her split lip, her swelling cheekbone, and smiled despite the pain. Nothing I couldn't handle. But her smile faded as she saw who else was in the helicopter, Commander Mark Reynolds, leader of the extraction team, but no sign of Sergeant Davis. Where's Davis? She demanded, leaning forward against the roar of the rotors. Reynolds' expression darkened. Captured. Desert Scorpion picked him up at the Western Depot while he was conducting surveillance. We think they're holding him at a secondary location. Cold dread settled in Morgan's stomach. If they had Davis, they'd be interrogating him right now. And if Drake had already identified her as Naval Special Warfare, they might know exactly what they had in Davis. "We need to go after him," she said immediately. Reynolds shook his head. "Not now. We're extracting to secure location first. Full debrief, medical check, then we formulate rescue op. By the book." Morgan wanted to argue, but years of discipline held her in check. Reynolds was right, rushing in without proper intelligence, and planning would likely get Davis killed and compromise more operators. Still, every minute that passed was another minute Davis endured whatever Desert Scorpion was doing to him. "I have critical intelligence," she said instead. "The compound near the Grand Canyon is their main base of operations. They're producing chemical weapons, they're advanced nerve agents. And there's something bigger going on." Drake had Russian-trained operatives working for him, former Spetsnaz. Reynolds' eyebrows rose. "Russian involvement. That confirms some of our intelligence. We've been tracking unusual patterns of former Soviet bloc operators entering the country through various channels." The Black Hawk banked sharply, heading east. Below them, the Arizona desert stretched out in all directions, the Grand Canyon visible as a massive wound in the Earth's surface to the north. "There's more," Morgan continued. "According to a source, they're planning a major movement of the weapons within the next 24 hours, likely to a distribution site for an attack." "Christ," Reynolds muttered. "Timelines accelerated then. We thought we had at least 48 hours. "Davis might know more," Morgan pointed out. "He was tracking their transport operations when he was captured." Reynolds nodded grimly. "All the more reason to get him back. But we do it smart, not fast." The helicopters landed 30 minutes later at a forward operating base disguised as a private airstrip. Medical personnel immediately approached to assess Morgan's injuries, but she waved them off. "I'm fine, cuts and bruises, nothing that impacts operational readiness." Reynolds led her to a secure briefing room where a tactical team was already assembling. Large monitors displayed satellite imagery of the region with several locations highlighted and annotated. A digital countdown on one screen showed 22, 47, 36 and ticking down. "Less than 23 hours until estimated weapons transport," Reynolds explained. "We're working on two parallel operations now. Team Alpha will focus on the weapons facility near the canyon. Team Bravo will locate and extract Sergeant Davis." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "I should be on Team Bravo. I know Davis know his training protocols, know how he'll respond in captivity." Reynolds studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Agreed, but you'll need medical clearance first and a proper gear loadout. Lieutenant Peterson will brief you on what we know about Davis's last known location." Lieutenant Peterson, a compact woman with sharp eyes and the focused demeanor of intelligence personnel, stepped forward with a tablet. "Sergeant Davis's tracking beacon went offline here," she said, indicating a point on the map about 40 miles from the canyon facility. "Satellite imagery shows a compound with security measures consistent with Desert Scorpion operations. Thermal scanning indicates approximately 12 personnel on site." Morgan studied the imagery, already formulating approach vectors and extraction plans. "Any idea who's in charge there now that Drake is dead?" "We believe operational command would fall to Anton Volkov," Peterson replied, bringing up an image of a lean, hard-faced man with cold eyes. "Former Russian military intelligence, GRU specifically. He's been Drake's second for about 3 years, according to our intelligence." Morgan felt a chill. GRU, Russian military intelligence. This confirmed Harrington's suspicions about connections to former Cold War operatives. "That explains the Spetsnaz-trained bodyguards," she murmured. "This isn't just a weapons trafficking operation. It's something more coordinated, more strategic." "Exactly," came a familiar voice from the doorway. Morgan turned to see Rear Admiral James Harrington entering the room, his imposing frame filling the doorway. Despite the late hour, he was immaculately dressed in his service uniform, the rows of ribbons on his chest testament to decades of service. "Admiral," Morgan said, straightening instinctively, "I wasn't expecting you to be here. When one of my operators uncovers a potential Russian chemical weapons operation on American soil, I make it my business to be here," Harrington replied. His eyes took in her battered face and something hardened in his expression. "I see Drake's hospitality was lacking." "Nothing permanent, sir," Morgan assured him, but he confirmed our suspicions about external connections. "The presence of Russian operatives can't be coincidence." Harrington nodded, his face grim. "It's not. We believe Desert Scorpion is just the visible face of an organization we've been tracking for years, the Pantheon, a network of former intelligence operatives, primarily Russian, but with elements from various former Eastern Bloc countries who never accepted the end of the Cold War. He moved to the central map display, zooming out to show a network of connections spanning multiple countries. They've been building infrastructure for decades, shell companies, front organizations, recruiting networks, always staying just below our radar, until now. Morgan studied the network, immediately recognizing the strategic placement of assets along critical infrastructure and population centers. This isn't just weapons trafficking. This is positioning for an attack. Precisely, Harrington confirmed. We believe that chemical weapons are just phase one of a larger operation. But we need concrete proof of the connection between Desert Scorpion and the Pantheon. Proof that Sergeant Davis might have obtained before his capture. Morgan felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about rescuing a fellow operator anymore. This was about preventing what could be the deadliest attack on American soil since 9/11. Sir, she said, meeting Harrington's gaze directly, request permission to lead the rescue operation for Sergeant Davis. Harrington studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Granted, but Lieutenant Commander, this is extraction only. We need Davis alive and whatever intelligence he's gathered intact. This is not a revenge mission for what Drake did to you or what they might be doing to Davis. Understood, sir, Morgan replied, though part of her, the part that still tasted blood in her mouth, wanted nothing more than to make every remaining member of Desert Scorpion pay for their actions. One more thing, Harrington added, lowering his voice. There's a chance, a small one but real, that there's a leak in our operation. The timing of Drake's interest in you, the capture of Davis, it could be coincidence, but in my experience, there's no such thing. Morgan processed this new complication. You think someone on our side is feeding information to the Pantheon? I think we need to operate with that possibility in mind, Harrington replied carefully. Trust the team you're with, but compartmentalize information where possible. If Davis has identified a mole, that makes him even more valuable and in even more danger. The implications were clear. If there was a traitor, and if that person had access to their current operation, the rescue mission could be compromised before it began. Reynolds approached carrying a secure tablet. Extraction plan is ready for review, ma'am. We move in 4 hours 0200 local time. Team consists of 6 operators, including yourself, full tactical loadout air support on standby. Morgan took the tablet, scanning the operational details with practiced efficiency. The approach vector through the dry creek bed gives us good concealment, but we'll need to move fast once we breach the perimeter. Satellite shows minimal cover in the compound courtyard. That's why we're going in dark, Reynolds explained. New moon tonight, and we'll be using the latest gen night vision. They'll never see us coming, or see us. 4 hours later, Morgan sat in a stealth-modified transport helicopter, checking her gear one final time. The tactical vest felt familiar against her body, the weight of the weapons reassuring. She'd exchanged her mission clothes for full combat attire, black tactical pants, long-sleeve combat shirt, lightweight armor. Beside her, 5 operators from Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the unit formerly known as SEAL Team 6, performed their own equipment checks with silent precision. These were among the most elite warriors on the planet, men who had conducted hundreds of operations similar to this one. 2 minutes to drop zone, the pilot's voice came through her headset. Morgan felt the familiar calm settling over her, the combat mindset that had been drilled into her through years of training and operations. Fear, anger, doubt, all these emotions were acknowledged, then set aside. What remained was cold clinical focus. The helicopter touched down briefly in a dry wash half a mile from the target compound. The team disembarked in practice formation, moving low and fast as the helicopter lifted off again, the sound of its rotors fading quickly in the desert night. Reynolds signaled with hand gestures, and the team moved out in staggered formation. Night vision goggles transforming the pitch-black landscape into shades of green clarity. They covered the half-mile approach in under 15 minutes using natural terrain features for concealment. The compound came into view, a collection of low buildings surrounded by a perimeter wall. 2 guards patrolled the outer fence line, moving in predictable patterns that spoke of complacency. Morgan and Reynolds exchanged glances, then hand signals. 2 operators detached from the group, circling wide to approach the guards from behind. Morgan watched through her night vision as they moved with ghost-like silence, closing on their targets. Simultaneous takedowns knifed to one guard, choke hold on the other. No shots, no sound, no alarm. The team converged on the breach point, a section of wall partially obscured by storage containers. Using tactical ladders, they scaled the 12-foot barrier and descended into the compound courtyard. Morgan's heart pounded with controlled intensity as they split into two-person teams, approaching separate buildings according to the pre-mission briefing. She and Reynolds moved toward the central structure, where thermal imaging had suggested a basement level, likely used for detention. The door was locked, but yielded to a specialized breaching tool. Reynolds entered first, weapon up, scanning for threats. Morgan followed, covering the opposite arc. The interior was dark and quiet, too quiet for a facility that should have had at least 10 personnel on site. They moved through empty rooms, finding evidence of recent occupation: coffee cups, still warm cigarettes, still smoldering in ashtrays, but no personnel. Something was wrong. They reached the basement access, a heavy metal door secured with an electronic lock. Reynolds attached a bypass device that cycled through combinations at high speed. Seconds ticked by, each one increasing Morgan's sense of unease. The lock clicked. Reynolds pulled the door open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. They moved down cautiously, weapons ready. At the bottom, a dimly lit corridor stretched before them, 3 doors visible along its length. The first 2 rooms were empty interrogation chambers, complete with ominous stains on the concrete floors. The third door was different, heavier, with multiple locks. Reynolds worked quickly to defeat them, while Morgan provided security, every sense alert for danger. When the door swung open, Morgan had to suppress a gasp. Davis was there, strapped to a metal chair in the center of the room. His face was barely recognizable through the bruising and swelling. Blood had dried in patterns down his shirt, and his breathing was shallow and labored. But what stopped Morgan cold was the digital timer attached to his chest, 00:45, and counting down. "Bomb," she whispered, holstering her weapon and dropping to her knees beside Davis. "Reynolds, get the team clear. I need to assess this device." "Negative," Reynolds replied firmly. "We extract together or not at all." Morgan was already examining the explosive device, her mind racing through bomb disposal training. It was sophisticated, multiple redundant triggers, pressure plates beneath Davis's chair, mercury switches that would detonate if moved incorrectly. "They knew we were coming," she muttered, carefully tracing wires without touching them. This was a trap. Davis's eyes fluttered open, focusing with the difficulty. "Morgan," he rasped, "you shouldn't be here. Saving your ass is exactly where I should be," she replied, continuing her assessment of the bomb. "What happened?" "Ambush at the depot," Davis managed. "They knew exactly where I'd be. Drake said they had someone on the inside." Morgan and Reynolds exchanged glances. Harrington's suspicions confirmed. "Did you get any names?" Morgan asked, locating what appeared to be the primary detonator. "Any idea who's feeding them information?" Davis's breathing hitched painfully. "Not names, but location. Heard them talking. Said their contact was in Virginia, close to command. Virginia, where Naval Special Warfare Command was headquartered, where Harrington operated." The implications were staggering. "Can you disarm it?" Reynolds asked, eyeing the timer, 00:28. Morgan nodded tightly. "I think so. Standard Russian SVU-3 design with modifications. If I'm right, cutting the blue wire will isolate the detonator from the primary charge." "And if you're wrong," Reynolds asked quietly. Morgan met his eyes. "Then you'll never know it." She turned back to the device, forcing her hands to remain steady as she produced wire cutters from her kit. 20 seconds remaining. "Davis," she said, "I need you to stay absolutely still. Reynolds, be ready to carry him out the moment I cut this wire." 15 seconds. Morgan isolated the blue wire, tracing it through the complex assembly one more time to verify her assessment. 10 seconds. She positioned the cutters. 5 seconds. She took a deep breath. "For Kate," she whispered, and cut the wire. The timer froze at 00:03. No explosion, no death, just the sound of 3 people breathing in a concrete room. "Clear," Morgan announced, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "Let's get him out of here." Reynolds quickly cut Davis free while Morgan provided security. The sergeant could barely stand, requiring support from both of them to move. "Reaper Actual, this is Bravo 1. Reynolds spoke into his comm. "Package secured, condition, Charlie. Require immediate case vac danger close LZ2. Copy Bravo 1, came the response. Case vac inbound ETA 3 minutes. They began the difficult process of moving Davis up the stairs and through the building. The compound remained eerily empty. Where is everyone? Morgan muttered as they emerged into the courtyard. As if in answer, floodlights suddenly blazed to life, bathing the compound in harsh white light. A voice boomed through speakers mounted on the perimeter wall. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, Commander Reynolds, so good of you to join us. Morgan squinted against the glare, trying to locate the source of the voice. A figure stood on a catwalk along the far wall, silhouetted against the lights. Anton Volkov, I presume, she called back, her mind racing through possible escape routes. Indeed, the voice replied, a Russian accent now detectable beneath the perfect English. I must congratulate you on disarming our little welcome gift. Most impressive. Drake clearly underestimated you. He's not the only one, Morgan replied coldly. Where are your men? Volkov seems like poor operational security to leave a facility this important so lightly guarded. A chuckle came through the speakers. Oh, they're here, just waiting for my signal. You see, we've been expecting you. In fact, we've been waiting for you to find Sergeant Davis and learn what he knows about our operation. Morgan felt ice form in her veins. This wasn't just a trap for their rescue team. It was an intelligence operation to determine what Davis had discovered and who he'd told. And now, Volkov continued, having confirmed that your command is aware of our connection to the Pantheon, we can proceed with the contingency plan. The weapon will be deployed as scheduled, though perhaps not at the target you're expecting. The distant sound of helicopter rotors reached Morgan's ears, their extraction approaching. She needed to keep Volkov talking. It won't work, she called out. Whatever you're planning, we've already alerted every federal agency. Every potential target is being secured. Volkov laughed again. You Americans never understand. You think in terms of buildings, landmarks, symbols. We think in terms of systems. You can't secure everything. The helicopter sounds grew louder. Any moment now, they'd have air support and extraction capability. You're fighting a war that ended 30 years ago, Volkov, Morgan said. The Cold War is over. The Cold War never ended, Lieutenant Commander, Volkov replied, his voice hardening. It merely evolved. And now I'm afraid our little conversation must conclude. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions around the compound, automatic weapons targeting their position. Morgan, Reynolds, and Davis dove for cover behind concrete barriers. Reaper Actual, we are taking fire, Reynolds shouted into his comm. Multiple hostiles need immediate support. The Black Hawk appeared above the compound door gunners, immediately engaging the hidden shooters with devastating effect. Morgan and Reynolds returned fire, creating the coverage they needed to move Davis toward the extraction point. The helicopter descended rapidly into the courtyard, hovering just high enough to avoid obstacles. Two operators leapt out, providing additional firepower as Morgan and Reynolds half-carried Davis toward the open door. Bullets pinged off the helicopter's armored sides. The crew chief reached out, helping them haul Davis's battered form into the cabin. Reynolds followed. Morgan was about to board when movement caught her eye. Volkov was running along the catwalk, heading for a vehicle parked beyond the perimeter wall. He's getting away, she shouted, pointing. Reynolds grabbed her arm. Let him go. We have Davis. We have the intel. That's the mission. For a split second, Morgan considered disobeying racing after Volkov to end this here and now. But training and discipline prevailed. The mission came first. Always. She climbed aboard and the Black Hawk lifted immediately, banking hard to clear the compound as gunfire continued to pursue them into the night sky. As they gained altitude, Morgan looked down at the compound, now alive with muzzle flashes in the chaos of combat. Somewhere down there, Volkov was escaping, probably to oversee whatever attack the Pantheon had planned. But they had Davis. They had confirmation of the Pantheon's existence and its connection to Desert Scorpion. And most importantly, they had evidence of a mole in Naval Special Warfare Command. Morgan looked at Davis, now receiving emergency medical treatment from one of the operators with combat medical training. His eyes found hers, filled with pain, but also determination. The Canyon facility, he gasped. That's not the main target. It's a decoy. Morgan leaned closer. What do you mean, what's the real target? Davis struggled to speak through swollen lips. Phoenix Convention Center, tomorrow, Veterans Memorial Ceremony, thousands of people. including including who Davis, Morgan pressed, dread building in her chest. Harrington, Davis whispered. Admiral Harrington is scheduled to speak. The implications hit Morgan like a physical blow. The attack wasn't just aimed at causing mass casualties. It was specifically designed to eliminate one of the Pantheon's most persistent adversaries, the man who had spent decades tracking their organization. The Black Hawk raced through the night sky toward the forward operating base, carrying with it the information needed to prevent catastrophe. But as Morgan looked at her watch, she realized with growing horror that they had less than 18 hours until the attack. And somewhere in Virginia, a traitor was potentially monitoring their every move. Dawn broke over the Arizona desert, casting long shadows across the forward operating base as Morgan Blackwood stood in the Tactical Operations Center. The digital countdown on the main screen showed 12:37:42 and ticking relentlessly downward, less than 13 hours, until the planned attack on the Phoenix Convention Center. Around her, operators and intelligence personnel moved with practiced urgency, the atmosphere charged with the controlled tension of professionals racing against time. Sergeant Davis had been airlifted to a secure medical facility, his information already cascading through intelligence channels. His revelation had transformed their understanding of the Pantheon's plan. The Grand Canyon facility was a diversion designed to draw resources away from the true target in Phoenix. Rear Admiral Harrington entered the room, his imposing presence causing conversations to momentarily pause. Despite having been awake for over 24 hours, he showed no signs of fatigue as he moved directly to the central planning table, where Morgan and Commander Reynolds waited. "The White House has been briefed," Harrington said without preamble. "Homeland Security is coordinating with local authorities to secure the convention center and surrounding areas. But we're not canceling the event." "Sir," Reynolds questioned, surprise evident in his voice. "Canceling alerts the Pantheon that we're onto them," Harrington explained. "They'll simply adjust their timeline and select another target one we might not identify in time. Our best option is to maintain the appearance of normal operations while positioning our forces to intercept the attack." Morgan studied the tactical display showing the convention center layout. "What about the intelligence leak, sir? If there's a mole in Naval Special Warfare Command, they could be feeding our countermeasures directly to Volkov." Harrington's eyes hardened. At this moment, all operational details are compartmentalized. Only the people in this room have the full picture. Everyone else gets need-to-know fragments only. He moved closer to the display, indicating the convention center's main entrance. "We've identified two potential delivery methods for the chemical agent. First, a ventilation system attack, which would require direct access to the environmental controls. Second, a distributed release using multiple smaller devices placed throughout the crowd." Reynolds pointed to several locations on the schematic. "Based on atmospheric modeling, these would be the optimal points for maximum dispersion. We need to establish surveillance on all of them." "Already in progress," Harrington confirmed. "Undercover teams are being positioned now, disguised as convention staff and security. But we need more." He turned to Morgan, his expression grave. "Lieutenant Commander, I'm putting you in command of the direct action team. If we identify the chemical weapons or their delivery system, your team will neutralize the threat. You'll have 6 operators, all from outside the standard command structure, to minimize leak potential." Morgan nodded, understanding the responsibility being placed on her shoulders. "What about Volkov? He escaped the compound last night. If he's directly overseeing the operation..." "Facial recognition algorithms are scanning every camera feed in a 50-mile radius," Harrington interrupted. "If he shows his face, we'll find him." "And the mole," Morgan pressed. "Davis said the leak was coming from Virginia, close to command. That narrows it down considerably." Harrington's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "A separate counterintelligence team is working that angle. For now, assume any communication outside this room could be compromised." Morgan caught something in the Admiral's eyes, a fleeting shadow that suggested he knew more than he was sharing. Before she could probe further, an intelligence officer approached with a tablet. "Admiral, we've got something," the officer said, handing over the device. "Thermal satellites picked up unusual activity at a warehouse 3 miles from the convention center. Multiple vehicles arriving over the past 4 hours, consistent with the patterns we observed at the Grand Canyon facility." Harrington examined the imagery, then passed the tablet to Morgan. "Could be a staging area for the attack. I want your team to investigate, but maintain surveillance protocols. Do not engage unless you confirm the presence of chemical agents or immediate threat to life. Understood, sir. Morgan replied, already mentally selecting gear and planning approach vectors. Lieutenant Commander Harrington added quietly, I selected you for this mission because of your unique combination of skills, but also because of something else, your ability to make the right decision when the rules no longer apply. If you confirm the presence of chemical weapons and determine immediate action is necessary, you have my authorization to proceed as you see fit. The weight of those words settled on Morgan's shoulders. It was the closest thing to carte blanche that anyone in her position could receive the authority to act on her own judgment if the situation demanded it. I won't let you down, sir, she said simply. Harrington nodded once, then turned back to the tactical display. Wheels up in 20 minutes. Good hunting. As Morgan left to prepare her team, she couldn't shake the feeling that something remained unsaid, some piece of the puzzle that Harrington was holding back. But there was no time to dwell on suspicions. The mission demanded her complete focus. 70 minutes later, Morgan and her six-person team were in position around the warehouse, having established a surveillance perimeter using both human observers and remote sensors. The building, a nondescript structure in an industrial zone, showed signs of recent activity. Two black SUVs were parked at the loading dock, and thermal imaging revealed approximately 8 heat signatures inside. Overwatch, this is Shadow 1, Morgan whispered into her communications gear. We have eyes on the target, multiple personnel inside concentrated in what appears to be the main storage area. Copy Shadow 1, Reynolds' voice replied from the Tactical Operations Center. Maintain position and continue observation. We're running the vehicle registrations now. Morgan signaled her team to hold as she adjusted her position slightly using a specialized optical device to peer through a dirt-streaked window. Inside, she could make out figures moving around pallets of equipment. One of them matched Anton Volkov's description. Overwatch, I have visual confirmation on Volkov, she reported. He appears to be overseeing the preparation of multiple containers. Could be the delivery system for the chemical agent. She continued her observation, carefully documenting every detail. The containers being prepared were small, briefcase-sized, easily transportable by a single person. A dozen of them sat on a central table with several people in what appeared to be specialized handling gear working on them. Overwatch, we've got what looks like final preparation of dispersal devices, Morgan continued. Request permission to move closer for confirmation of chemical agents. There was a moment of silence, then Reynolds' voice returned. Shadow 1, you are cleared for closer observation. Use extreme caution. Chemical detection equipment only. Do not expose yourself. Morgan selected one team member, Lieutenant Wilson, who had specialized training in chemical weapons identification, to accompany her in a closer approach. They moved silently through the industrial lot using shipping containers and parked vehicles for cover. Reaching the building's rear entrance, Morgan deployed a fiber optic camera through a gap in the doorframe, providing a clear view of the interior operation. Wilson carefully extended a chemical detection wand through the same gap, drawing air samples for analysis. The handheld device processed for 30 seconds, then displayed its results. Wilson's eyes widened behind his tactical goggles. VX7 confirmed, he whispered. Advanced nerve agent, military grade. Concentration levels indicate they've got enough in there to take out half of Phoenix. Morgan felt cold determination replace the adrenaline in her veins. The worst-case scenario was confirmed. She activated her comlink. Overwatch Shadow 1, chemical detection, positive for VX7 nerve agent. Multiple dispersal devices being prepared for transport. Volkov is on-site personally overseeing the operation. Request immediate authorization for direct action. The pause that followed lasted longer than standard operational protocols would dictate. Something was happening at command. Finally, Harrington's voice came through, pitched low and urgent. Shadow 1, be advised, we have new intelligence. The Phoenix attack may be a secondary target. Repeat, we have reason to believe the convention center could be a diversion from their primary objective. Morgan frowned. Overwatch, what's the primary target? Working to confirm now, Harrington replied. Maintain surveillance. Do not engage until we have clarity on the full operational picture. Morgan exchanged glances with Wilson, whose expression mirrored her own concern. The tactical situation was clear: enemy personnel preparing weapons of mass destruction for imminent deployment. Standard protocols called for immediate interdiction. Overwatch, we have visual confirmation of chemical weapons being prepared for transport. she repeated more forcefully. If they move, these devices, tracking and interdiction becomes exponentially more difficult. Understood, Shadow One, Harrington responded, tension evident in his voice. Stand by for INM. His transmission cut off, abruptly replaced by static. Morgan tapped her communications device, attempting to re-establish contact. Overwatch, this is Shadow One. Comm check over. Nothing but static responded. All Shadow elements comm check, Morgan tried. Her team responded immediately, confirming that the communication breakdown was with command, not their tactical network. Could be jamming, Wilson suggested. If they detected our transmissions, Morgan shook her head. Targeted jamming would indicate they know our exact frequencies and encryption. That level of compromise would require... She didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what it would require: someone with direct access to their mission parameters. The mole. Morgan made her decision. All Shadow elements, be advised, communications with Overwatch are down. Possible security compromise. We are executing direct action protocol effective immediately. She quickly outlined the assault plan, a simultaneous breach from 3 entry points, with specialized teams designated to secure the chemical weapons and neutralize hostile personnel. Every member of her team understood the stakes. If even one of those dispersal devices made it to the convention center, thousands would die. Execute on my mark, Morgan instructed, moving into position at the rear entrance. 3, 2, 1, mark. The warehouse erupted in coordinated chaos as Morgan's team breached from multiple points. Flashbang grenades disoriented the occupants, giving the operators precious seconds to identify threats and targets. Morgan moved through the space with lethal efficiency, identifying Volkov immediately as he reached for a weapon. 2 shots, center mass textbook perfect, sent him crashing backward over a table of equipment. Around her, her team engaged the other hostiles with precise, disciplined fire. Within 20 seconds, 5 enemy personnel were down. 2 were surrendering with hands raised, and 1 was attempting to flee toward the loading dock. Secure the weapons, Morgan shouted, pursuing the fleeing figure, a compact man with the hard movements of military training. He reached the SUV at the loading dock, yanking open the driver's door. Morgan closed the distance in a full sprint, launching herself in a flying tackle that slammed him against the vehicle's frame. He responded with practiced violence, an elbow strike that would have shattered her nose had she not anticipated it, and rolled with the impact. They grappled briefly, the man displaying the distinctive techniques of Russian combat systems. Morgan countered with the integrated fighting style taught to SEAL operators, a blend of multiple disciplines optimized for lethal efficiency. A knee to the solar plexus doubled him over. A precision strike to the throat left him gasping. A final blow to the temple rendered him unconscious. Morgan zip-tied his wrists, then keyed her tactical radio. All elements report. The confirmations came quickly, all hostiles neutralized or captured. No friendly casualties, chemical weapons secured, and containment protocols initiated. She returned to the main area where her team had established control. Lieutenant Wilson was already working with another operator to secure the chemical dispersal devices, carefully placing them in specialized containment units designed for transport of hazardous materials. 12 devices total, Wilson reported, each one capable of dispersing a lethal dose to approximately 500 people, depending on air currents and enclosed spaces. They were ready for transport. Morgan nodded, then turned her attention to the man she now recognized as Anton Volkov, who lay bleeding but alive on the concrete floor. One of her operators was providing emergency medical treatment, standard procedure, even for enemy combatants. She knelt beside him, maintaining a safe distance, but close enough to establish eye contact. It's over, Volkov. We've secured the weapons. Your operation is compromised. Volkov's eyes focused on her pain, evident in his expression, but also something else, a cold calculation that sent warning signals through Morgan's mind. You think, he coughed, blood staining his teeth, you think this is the only operation Phoenix is just one target? The Pantheon has been planning this for decades. Planning what? Morgan demanded. A grim smile spread across his face. The reckoning. America thought the Cold War ended with the fall of the Soviet Union. But some wars never truly end. They just evolve. Morgan leaned closer. What's the primary target? Volkov Phoenix is a diversion? What's the real objective? Volkov's laugh turned into a wet cough. You should ask your admiral. He knows. He's known all along. His eyes held a malicious gleam. Why do you think communications with your command suddenly failed? Someone doesn't want you to succeed. A chill ran through Morgan's blood. What are you saying? The mole, Volkov whispered, his strength visibly fading. Closer than you think. Much closer. Before Morgan could press further, the warehouse doors burst open. A tactical team in full gear swarmed in, weapons raised, but these weren't her operators. These were FBI hostage rescue team members moving with the precision of an elite unit. Federal agents, the lead officer shouted. Everyone down, hands where I can see them. Morgan's team, recognizing the potential for blue-on-blue contact, immediately identified themselves. Naval Special Warfare Friendlies. We have secured chemical weapons and hostile forces. Tense moments passed as the two tactical teams established recognition protocols. Finally, the FBI team leader approached Morgan. Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, I'm Special Agent Reeves, FBI HRT. We were dispatched on direct orders from Washington to secure this site and all personnel. Morgan frowned. We're in the middle of a critical counterterrorism operation. We've just prevented a chemical attack on the Phoenix Convention Center. I'm aware of the operation parameters, Reeves replied, but our orders are explicit. All Naval Special Warfare personnel are to stand down and return to base immediately. FBI has jurisdiction now. Under whose authority, Bueno? Morgan demanded. Homeland Security with White House approval, Reeves stated flatly. There's concern about a security compromise within Naval Special Warfare Command. All operations have been temporarily transferred to FBI oversight. The implications were staggering. If Homeland Security had identified a significant security breach within Naval Special Warfare, the situation was far more serious than even Morgan had suspected. What about the chemical weapons? She asked, nodding toward the containment units where her team had secured the dispersal devices. Our CBRN team will handle containment and transport, Reeves assured her. We have a secure facility standing by. Morgan considered her options. Protocol dictated compliance with federal jurisdiction in domestic operations, but Volkov's words about the mole and Harrington lingered in her mind. Something wasn't right. I need to speak with Admiral Harrington, she insisted. Reeves's expression tightened. Admiral Harrington is currently unavailable. He's been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The news hit Morgan like a physical blow. Harrington under investigation. It made no sense unless Volkov was telling the truth, unless the security breach went all the way to the top. My team secured these weapons and these prisoners, Morgan said firmly. We'll maintain custody until I receive direct confirmation of the transfer of authority from my chain of command. Reeves stepped closer, lowering his voice. Lieutenant Commander, I understand your position, but you need to understand mine. I have orders signed by the Director of Homeland Security to secure this site and all evidence. If you interfere, I am authorized to place you and your team under arrest. The standoff stretched for several tense seconds. Morgan weighed her training against her instincts. Procedure dictated compliance, but something about the situation felt wrong, the timing too convenient, the breakdown in communications too targeted. Her decision was interrupted by a commotion from where Volkov lay. The medical operator jumped back as Volkov began convulsing, white foam appearing at his mouth. He's seizing, the operator called. Possible cyanide capsule. Morgan rushed over, but it was already too late. Volkov's body gave a final shudder, then went still, his eyes fixed and dilated. The Russian operative had chosen death over capture, taking with him whatever knowledge he possessed about the Pantheon's true plans. Damn it, Morgan muttered, then turned back to Reeves. We just lost our primary intelligence source on a major terrorist operation. I need to report this immediately. You can file your report back at base, Reeves replied, unmoved. My orders stand. Your team is to withdraw immediately. Morgan recognized when a tactical situation had become untenable. She gave the order for her team to stand down and prepare for withdrawal, but as they moved toward the exit, she paused beside Lieutenant Wilson. Get a sample, she whispered, nodding imperceptibly toward the containment units. Something's wrong with this whole picture. We need our own analysis. Wilson gave a nearly invisible nod of acknowledgement, adjusting his movement to casually pass by the chemical weapons. His hand moved with the practiced sleight of hand taught in advanced intelligence collection courses. 30 minutes later, Morgan's team was back at the forward operating base, the atmosphere thick with tension and uncertainty. The news of Harrington's administrative leave had spread along with rumors of a high-level security breach. Morgan tried repeatedly to contact Commander Reynolds or anyone in the original command structure, but was met with bureaucratic obstacles at every turn. "They're stonewalling us," she told her team in the privacy of their ready room. "Something's happening at command level that we're not being told about." Wilson produced a small sealed container from his tactical vest. "I got the sample. It's not much, but enough for a preliminary analysis if we can get it to a lab." Morgan nodded her appreciation. "Good work. But we need to be careful who we trust with this. If there really is a mole at command level." The door opened and a junior officer entered with a tablet. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwood, secure message for you." Morgan took the tablet, entered her authentication codes, and opened the message. It was brief text only from Commander Patricia Walsh. "LTCMDR Blackwood Harrington detained under suspicion of espionage. Evidence suggests long-term connection to Russian intelligence dating back to Cold War era. Stand down and await further instructions. All operations suspended. Walsh." Morgan stared at the message, disbelief warring with the cold logic of the situation. Harrington, a Russian asset, the man who had spent decades hunting Soviet and post-Soviet operatives. It seemed impossible, and yet it would explain why he'd been so knowledgeable about the Pantheon, why he'd personally selected her for this mission, why communications had been cut at the critical moment before the raid. She handed the tablet to Wilson, letting him read the message while she processed the implications. If Harrington was the mole, everything about their mission was compromised: targets, timelines, tactical plans, everything. "This doesn't feel right," Wilson said after reading the message. "Harrington's record is impeccable. 38 years of service, multiple commendations for counterintelligence operations against Russia specifically. The perfect cover for a deep-placed asset," Morgan countered, playing devil's advocate against her own instincts. "Who better to avoid detection than the person leading the hunt?" Wilson handed the tablet back. "Maybe, but it's awfully convenient timing. Just as we confirm chemical weapons and Volkov's involvement, suddenly Harrington is removed and FBI takes over. Seems like someone wants us out of the picture." Morgan considered this perspective, mentally reviewing the sequence of events. The breakdown in communications had occurred precisely when she was requesting permission to raid the warehouse. If Harrington had wanted to prevent that raid, he could have simply denied permission. Why go through the elaborate charade of a communications failure unless he wasn't the one who cut the communications, unless someone else had intervened to prevent him from giving the authorization? "We need more information," she decided, "and we need it fast. Whatever the Pantheon's true plan is, it's happening now. Volkov said Phoenix was just a diversion. There's another target, something bigger." She turned to the junior officer who had delivered the message. "I need to speak with Commander Walsh immediately. Secure line, highest priority." "Ma'am, Commander Walsh left for Washington 2 hours ago," the officer replied. "Some kind of emergency briefing at the Pentagon." Another piece that didn't fit. Walsh leaving Arizona in the middle of a critical operations standard procedure would keep the operational commander on site until the threat was neutralized. Morgan made her decision. "Lieutenant Wilson, get that sample analyzed. Use your contact at the university lab if you have to, but do it quietly. The rest of you compile everything we know about the Pantheon Volkov's operation and potential targets. We're missing something critical." As her team dispersed to their tasks, Morgan retreated to a secure communications room. She needed to contact someone outside the potentially compromised command structure, someone with the authority and resources to help make sense of the situation. She used her emergency authentication codes to establish a direct link to the National Counterterrorism Center, requesting immediate connection to the director. Minutes passed as the request worked its way through security protocols and verification procedures. Finally, the screen lit up, showing a stern-faced woman in her 60s, Director Catherine Matheson, a career intelligence officer who had risen through the ranks of multiple agencies before taking leadership of the NCTC. "Lieutenant Commander Blackwood," Matheson greeted her. "I understand you are calling on an emergency protocol. This better be good." "Director, I have reason to believe we're facing an imminent chemical weapons attack by a group called the Pantheon." Morgan began, then concisely outlined everything they discovered: the VX-7 nerve agent Volkov's operation, the apparent link to former Russian intelligence, and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Harrington's removal. Matheson listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. When Morgan finished, the director remained silent for several seconds, clearly processing the information. "What you're suggesting," she finally said, "is that Admiral Harrington's detention might be part of the Pantheon's operation, that he's been falsely accused to disrupt our response capability." "It's a possibility we need to consider," Morgan replied carefully. "The timing is highly suspicious, and Volkov specifically mentioned that Phoenix was a diversion from their true target." Matheson leaned forward slightly. "Lieutenant Commander, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. 6 hours ago, we intercepted communications suggesting a possible attack on a high-value target in Washington, D.C. The chatter mentioned chemical weapons, but we had no confirmation until your operation in Phoenix." Morgan felt her pulse quicken. "What target in D.C.? "We don't know," Matheson admitted, "but there's a major security conference at the Capitol tomorrow morning. Dozens of high-ranking military and intelligence officials will be present. If the Pantheon wanted to decapitate America's security apparatus in one strike..." The pieces suddenly aligned in Morgan's mind. "Director, I believe Admiral Harrington was trying to warn us about this when our communications were cut. If he's been falsely accused, he may be the primary target, not just collateral damage. Harrington is currently being held at the Pentagon pending investigation," Matheson confirmed. "If you're right, and he's been deliberately removed from command to facilitate an attack..." Morgan didn't need her to finish the thought. If Harrington had been targeted specifically, it meant someone in a position of significant authority was working for the Pantheon. Someone who could issue orders to detain an admiral, who could redirect FBI resources, who could disrupt military communications. "We need to get to Harrington," Morgan stated firmly, "and we need to secure that conference. Director, I'm requesting authorization to form a rapid response team and deploy to Washington immediately." Matheson hesitated, clearly weighing the implications of authorizing a military special operations team to deploy to the nation's capital based on what was still largely circumstantial evidence. "I can't officially authorize that," she finally said, "but I can ensure that a transport aircraft becomes available for training purposes within the hour. And I can make sure that certain security protocols at the Pentagon are temporarily adjusted for a scheduled systems test." It was as close to authorization as Morgan could expect, given the circumstances, plausible deniability, combined with practical support. "Thank you, Director," Morgan said, understanding the professional risk Matheson was taking. "Lieutenant Commander," Matheson added before ending the call, "if you're wrong about this, both our careers are over. If you're right, we may not live to care. Good luck." The screen went dark, leaving Morgan alone with the weight of what was to come. She had just over 16 hours to get to Washington, locate Harrington, identify the true mole, and prevent a chemical attack that could devastate the nation's security leadership. She gathered her team, selecting the 4 operators she trusted most implicitly. "Gear up for urban counterterrorism operation," she instructed. "We're wheels up in 30 minutes for Washington, D.C. As they prepared, Wilson approached with a tablet displaying laboratory results. "Analysis confirms VX7, but with modifications I haven't seen before. The molecular structure has been altered to resist standard countermeasures. Atropine injectors won't work against this." Morgan absorbed this disturbing news. "They've engineered it specifically to defeat our defensive protocols. These people aren't just terrorists, they're sophisticated weapons developers with access to advanced research capabilities." "That's not all," Wilson continued. "I cross-referenced everything we have on the Pantheon with historical records from the Cold War era. Look at this." He displayed an old photograph showing a group of Soviet military officers at what appeared to be a formal function. Third from the left, that's a much younger Volkov. And next to him, Morgan studied the image, focusing on the figure. Wilson indicated a young officer with familiar features that aged into the face she now recognized. "That's Commander Walsh," she said, shock evident in her voice. Wilson nodded grimly. "Photo taken in Moscow, 1987. Patricia Walsh was supposedly stationed at the American Embassy in Belgium at that time. There's no record of her being in Moscow." The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Not Harrington Walsh, the trusted XO who had been with him for years, who had access to every operation, every protocol, every security measure, who had conveniently left for Washington just as their operation reached its critical phase. She's going to the conference, Morgan realized aloud. She's part of the Pantheon. She had Harrington detained to get him out of the way and to position herself in Washington for the attack. Wilson's expression hardened. We need to move. Now. As they boarded the transport aircraft that would take them to Washington, Morgan felt the cold clarity of combat focus settling over her. The mission had evolved beyond a standard counterterrorism operation. This was now about saving not just lives, but the very security structure of the nation. Somewhere over the heartland of America, Morgan checked her weapons one final time, mentally preparing for what awaited in Washington. She thought briefly of Harrington, the mentor, who had believed in her, who had recognized something in her that others had missed. The man who now sat in a Pentagon detention cell, falsely accused by his most trusted officer. "We're coming, sir," she whispered to herself as the aircraft began its descent toward Andrews Air Force Base. Just hold on a little longer. The final confrontation with the Pantheon and their decades-long plan was about to begin. And Lieutenant Commander Morgan Blackwood, the woman who had proven what happens when you underestimate a Navy SEAL, was bringing the fight directly to them.